Hey, I'm gonna show you how I made this box. Okay, bye.
Oh, what is up, my friends? Yes, I am in a different location than usual, quarantine life and such. I am up in New York, my mother's house, but that does not stop me from making interesting things, so let's get to it. Yes, indeed, we are going to kick it off at the table saw. Now, one thing I do want to say as this starts off, first of all, everything starts off at the table saw or at some milling machine, but this video does move very quickly in the beginning because it is just essentially making a rectangle, which I think the vast majority of you understand the basics of. Cut something to length and width and thickness, and then do whatever type of joinery you need to do and then glue it together. Now, that being said, the type of joinery I used on here was a miter, and in order to seat the bottom and the top, I just used simple grooves along the pieces, which I cut here. You saw that I put this piece of plywood down, which is just to act as a zero clearance fence, and then I can pop that off because it's only double stick tape on, because this is a contractor saw, which does not have the finest of tolerances, but it did get the job done. Now, I did a good bit of hand planing on these pieces because the thickness planer that I'm working with here is fine. It's a little subpar, but it did take a lot of hand planing in order to get the job done. And you can see the joinery on these pieces off the table saw wasn't perfect either. So I did use a dado plane or a rabbiting plane in order to make those beautiful. Now, once I've got everything cut and fitted properly, I'm just gonna go ahead and dry fit this to make sure that everything is seating, to make sure my miters are clean, and to make sure that my joinery lines up so I can separate the top from the base before I glue it up. Now it's back to the table saw where I do separate the top from the base. Be mindful when you're working with small pieces on the table saw. It's not always safe, but it is effective. If I had a bandsaw, I would have used it, but I don't have a bandsaw here. Now it's pre-sanding all of the pieces before glue up, and this is just simply a sanding block and some sandpaper. And Huckleberry getting all up in the game, man. Always wanting the attention, that one. Can't say I blame him though, he's a handsome pup. Now, when I glue up miters, I often use blue tape in lieu of clamps. It works just fine as long as your joinery is in line and tight. If it was any larger, if I was doing things like a picture frame or a large cabinet, I might use a belt clamp, but in this case, for something so small, blue tape gets the job done. You can also use packing tape and other things. Just make sure that you get glue all over the surface. You're gonna try to use minimal glue in order to lessen the squeeze out that you have, but all things considered, you're probably gonna get a little bit of squeeze out, so just make sure you go in there and clean it out with either some water and a toothbrush or a ruler or something of that nature. Now, while that's drying, I went ahead and started the lid. Now, I'm using a Fordham rotary carver with the saber tooth bits. They work great. The reason I choose this method is just because it's a little bit easier to get some weird shapes and I don't have to worry about grain. If I was carving with gouges, I would have to consider what direction I'm carving, the blowout that might happen, etc. Whereas with the rotary carvers, I can just go in there and grind away material. And you can see you get this really interesting texture. Neighbors. What are they hammering on? I think they're just hitting the side of the house in order to affect the sound quality of my video. I think they're just messing with me right now. If I was a betting man, that's what I would bet on at least. Now, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, I didn't finish carving the top before I glued it up. I glued it up when it was maybe 80 to 90% the way done because I knew that the texture of the top was going to spill over the sides onto the exterior of the box. That's the whole concept of this piece, is the idea of that stone creating a ripple that grows larger and larger until it spills out into the world. So I went ahead and glued the top up, clamped the top to the base, and then started carving the outside to line up with the lines that I had created on the top. Roughly, it's not going to be perfect at first. Remember, when you're carving, you are removing material in chunks and you are working the entire surface in order to create an image and then refine that image over time. You're not going to finish 100% one area and then move on to the next. You want everything to be moving in tandem. Now, I use the rotary sander a lot to smooth out my curved lines. I'm gonna be honest, it's not great for the sander, so just be mindful of that, but it is effective. Now, soapstone is a very soft material, so in order to get that to that river stone look that I wanted, I just shaped it roughly with a file and then took it through a series of sandpaper grits and rolled it around in my hand over and over. Didn't take very long. I mean, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, but it ended up with the look that I wanted, and then I just glued it in with some 5-minute epoxy. After that, it was just a series of light sanding all the way up to 400 grit, and then it's time for finishing. Now I'm using a poly oil blend for the first 4 coats-ish, after which I switch to a oil wax blend, and then you get this really nice lustery sheen, this kind of buttery smooth sheen, and you have this really nice tactile finish because of the wax in the oil for the last couple of coats. And you just get this really nice effect. I'm really happy with the way this box turned out. So there you go, friends. You see, it's not a very complicated process making something like this. It's just a rectangle, after which you just start removing material, kind of haphazardly, honestly. You can use a rotary carver. You don't need to. You can use a Dremel if you have it. You can use gouges, you can use files, you can use rasps, you can just use sandpaper. So I encourage you to go try to do the thing and let me know how it turns out. Until then, be good, make good decisions, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.